So I want to take this episode to just kind of recap and look at, I think individually every video. I don't know how much I'll have to say about each of them individually, but I want to start out with the Die Hard series. Actually, this is great because this is exactly what I was talking about. Of this was a concept. So where the Die Hard, where the Die Hard series came from, and funny enough, I totally forgot there was a series of movies called Die Hard. So I tell people like, "Oh, I made these videos called Die Hard," and they're like, "Oh, like the action movie, like the Bruce Willis movies." I'm like, "Oh, I forgot those thing." I called it Die Hard because Die Hard game fan and all that. The Die Hard series came from an early episode I did on Girls of Gaming, which was Dave Halverson's sort of. It was this annually published magazine. I think he did it for, I want to say, 9 years, something like that. Like a lot longer than you would have expected. Maybe more like 7, 8 years. And it was like this. That's an interesting video. It's definitely like in the earlier part of the series, so it's a little rougher in terms of like the audio and the editing and stuff. But I think it's a funny video in a lot of ways, and I really enjoyed researching that topic. I probably am the foremost expert on Girls of Gaming now, besides the people who made it, as I am with a die-hard game fan in general at this point. And what was so interesting about that was that like it's such a great sampler for who Dave Halverson is, because the first issue of Girls of Gaming is like very respectable. It's actually, you look at it and you think that it's going to be just kind of schlocky, cheesy sort of like, okay, it's just going to be titties and softcore porn and shit like that with video game characters. Okay, whatever. And then you actually like get into reading it, and it's actually a lot of very interesting interviews with like artists, and Dave is not the best interviewer. Like I think I said that in the video. He's not the best interviewer. He does not ask the best questions. His questions are not particularly interesting all the time, but it's a topic that we don't hear about much, and I think that was interesting. That like you could take something that we usually look at as being very like lowbrow and unsophisticated, but then you talk to the artists who make that, and it kind of like gives you a little bit of perspective on like it's almost like a cultural thing. Like we very much dismiss eroticism and sexuality, but there's like very legitimate human element. It's a part of the human experience, and to some artists that's very important. Obviously some of them are just doing it because they like titties, but like there's you talk to them, and there's like a very real like craft and artsmanship to the way that they like depict the human form, and hearing about that is very interesting. It was also cool because in that video there was an interview I'd never seen before with Daisuke Ishiwatari, and I think that's a very obscure, interesting interview that maybe I should like just signal boost or something for like the Guilty Gear community, because it's very interesting. All this to say is that the first issue is actually quite respectable and really subverted my expectations. And every episode, every issue after that just devolved into exactly what you think it's going to be. Basically, just an art book with a lot of titties. And to be honest, that's not the worst thing in the world. I don't care about, I'm not some prude. I see a lot of artwork on the daily, let's say. Like I'm not like opposed to the idea of it, but what was so what made it interesting to me, and what made the arc and the story of that video so interesting, is that there was this downturn in this kind of this disappointment. In like, whoa, this is actually a very legitimate, interesting piece of like artistic, just like a series of interviews about art on something that we don't usually get to hear about, and then it just evolves into very surface level TNA pretty much, and that I thought was in itself interesting, and also Dave Halverson being a closeted furry. So I through that I was like, I found out about this guy Dave Halverson because I like to dig into, okay, who made this and where did they come from, where'd they go. That led me down the rabbit hole of DieHard Game Fan and Gamers Republic and everything he did, and eventually that. I read this stuff and I remember just looking at like the Hardcore Gamer 101 page, which was kind of like the Bible that I used for a lot of the Die Hard series. Like that was my source for so much. Shout out John Chapaniak for putting all that together. And I looked at that and I was like, oh my god, this is bigger than I could have ever imagined. And I kind of gave some of the highlights, like, he gave Sonic 06 like a 9 and stuff like that. But I didn't get into details because I hadn't researched the details yet. Very much like, okay, I'm going to shelve this for later. And I was looking at it and I was like, okay, at some point during that first season, I was like, okay, I have to make a video on this guy. He's too interesting. It seems too wild. It's too crazy. And no one knows about this. It's so obscure. And it's at least like not unless you were there, it's very obscure. You were there and you were reading magazines, and specifically you were reading Game Fan. You probably didn't know about a lot of this stuff. So it's funny because I always thought of it as like, I think I just in my mind I called it, I have to do the Dave Halverson video. The Dave Halverson video, singular. And now obviously it turned into a lot more than that. And I think that's an interesting example of the way that videos can just really unfold during the research process, where it's like, wow, well, actually, there's a lot to say about here. And I think there's a comment on, I think part 4 or part 5, where someone goes like, every time I thought it was over, it just kept going. There just kept being more. There's just so much information. There was just so much that happened in this entire, I called it a saga in like the complete version or whatever, or one of those, the playlist, something like that. I called it a saga because it really is like, it is a decade spanning journey with lots of people going on different life paths, industry stuff happening, journalistic stuff, interpersonal drama. There's so much going on, and it's all and the center of it all is this just guy who you just can't figure out. And that's what's so interesting about Dave, is that, and I think like the emotional core of the whole series kind of is that like Dave Halverson as a person is so mystifying. He's so strange, because you hear about all these stories, and because so much of the stuff is secondhand, and he rarely speaks himself on things that happened. He's given a couple interviews, he's given a couple statements, but so much of the information is all from other people who were around him. And so you're seeing him through all of these different perspectives, all these different lenses, different points of time. And you also add on like age on top of that. Like people's opinions of him changed as they got older and they got further away from the situation and things like that. And that's what makes it so interesting. It's like this kaleidoscope, this just set of crystals that you're seeing this one image refracted through a billion different ways. And it helps that he himself, like there's all these elements to him that you can glean from the way that people talk about him, from people who just hate his fucking guts to people who like have respect for him, to people who are like in the middle of like, hey, they didn't like this thing that he did, but like their time with him was really fun. Like you get that kind of thing, and they've never worked a job quite like it. And it's really what my goal was I said this at the end of like when I put them all together, I recorded a little segment, like a little bit of commentary, like post thoughts when I made the complete like Die Hard like director's cut version, just the full like binge compilation video version of it. And I said what I this was always the intent of the series, was that the viewer could walk away from that series thinking either that Dave it wasn't guaranteed what you were going to think about him. You could have some respect for him. You could think he was a total piece of shit. You could be somewhere in the middle. And I wanted people to be able to make their own decisions. To make their own decisions about that. And I think I was pretty successful. I'm actually very happy with how this turned out. There's definitely a lot of bashing, because I mean, like, he did shit that was inexcusable. He did stuff that was really scummy and amoral. I mean, fuck, like, what? I don't care. Put another body on the fire for all I care, or something like that. Like, holy shit, dude. And then, you read these other interviews with him, and you get this other sense that, like, he cares, and I wanted to definitely rag on him for, like, the bad stuff he did do, because I think he deserved it, and that's sort of my perspective, but which I'm kind of trying to impart in my videos, but a much larger part of my perspective would just be that, like, yeah, he's a complicated guy, and I wanted that to come through. Speaking on, like, some of the individual parts of the series itself, I just kind of got, like, in the background, I'm just sort of watching the first part back, and holy shit, is it already? No, okay, it's only like halfway done. I was like, how long have I been rambling? So the first part is, like, a little bit rough. Not really. It's the only part that I really went back and I changed when I did the DX version of the video. And the reason for that is a little embarrassing. So there's a little bit of funny sort of backstory. I can laugh about it. I hope you guys can laugh about it too. Well, number one, there's straight up just like a regular editing issue in that video, which is that there's a shot of Tim. Oh, I keep thinking Tim Willits. No. Who am I thinking of? Tim Lindquist. There's a shot of, like, Tim Lindquist, and I just accidentally had, like, new text layer just sitting in the frame, like the default what you get when you add a text layer in Premiere. And I was so pissed about that, because, like, I watched that video, like, 3 times over before I put it out. Like, honestly, the feeling of, like, relief and, like, holy shit, because I'd had it built up in my head for so long before I made it, and just, like, the feeling of relief I had when I had just finished the video, I was like, damn, I think I just said to myself, like, holy shit, I can't believe it's done. I can't believe I finished it. And then I watched it back, and I'm like, because I got a comment about it, someone asking, like, hey, is this a bit? I was like, fuck, god damn it, I missed that. So that was one thing that I went back and I basically recreated that shot and just fixed it, basically. I re-edited it. I literally just got all the assets back and remade it. Thankfully, it was not a complex shot, so. I could do that. The second one is a little like, I cringe more at myself. So there was a person who was very important to the Game Fan story named Molly Patterson. You might remember her, because I cite her a lot. She is one of the people who was most talkative. She does a lot of. If you reached out to her, she's talked a lot about her experiences with Game Fan on various forums. She's done interviews. She did one with, like, Nintendo Life that I referenced a couple times throughout the video. Like, she's very, like, she's a huge source of information. Now, Molly is a trans woman, and she came out as a woman in, I don't know exactly when, I couldn't find exactly when, but sometime after 2010. After or around 2010 was kind of like where I sort of figured she came out, and she started going as Molly. While she was working, obviously, at Game Fan back in the 90s, she was not Molly. And So throughout the video, the first part, I erroneously, accidentally referred to her by her dead name, which I felt very bad about as soon as So obviously because I was basically... So the way that I did the research for this series was that when I talk about, like, how much... like wanting to do projects that took more time, the first episode of Game Fan, the first week that I spent working on it was all research. It was all literally reading. It was all reading excuse me, the Hardcore Game Fan page that just compiled all the forum threads together. Just reading for like 4 to 5 hours a day and taking notes and trying to put things together and trying to understand who was who and what happened when, and maybe create some sort of timeline. And so now you have to understand that, like, at Game Fan, people had a lot of pseudonyms. So obviously you had someone's real name, and then they also had pretty much everyone had at least one, sometimes more than one, pseudonym that they would write under. Like, you know, Dave was like E-Storm or something like that. And then you also have this added factor of, well, when people post on forums, they might have a different username, or they might have multiple different usernames. And I sort of like got it, and John Chapaniak did a pretty good job of like picking essentially one name for everyone and pretty much sticking to it. But I was very confused until I sort of figured that out, and keeping track of who was who, because they would refer to each other by name. I don't think he didn't change the actual text, I believe, but he did change, like, I guess the name of the person who was speaking, right? Like, they say this, like the dialogue, whatever. Their label in the dialogue overall. But he wouldn't really change the specific names of when they were speaking, like when they were actually in their writing. And so I had like a key. I literally had like a key in my notes of who was who, and like all the different names they went by. Just so that I could keep that straight. And obviously, because those forum posts, I think the latest one is like 2007. But most of the activity happened in like the mid-2000s. So obviously Molly was being referred to by her dead name, and so that's like, I was like, okay, Shidoshi is this person. That's what I would do. I would be like, okay, who's the fuck another person? Like, Waka was this guy. Some stuff like that. Special K was K Kabuki. Holy shit. And then I in researching, this is really funny, and not really funny. So I referred to her by her dead name in the first video because I literally didn't know. It wasn't there. And the sorry, I lost my train of thought. The name Molly didn't show up until I clicked on like one of the source links, and this series was my life for like 4 months, and I knew what I had read these, you know, these posts from these people so many times that I could like match what they said to who said it. Like, I knew it. And I saw something and I was like, didn't Shidoshi write that? But then I looked at the person who wrote it, and their profile was like, it just looked like a woman's profile. I don't know how to describe it. And I think specifically the username was like Molly Penn. And I was like, what? So I go to the profile and I'm like, huh? But yeah, no, because I double checked. I'm like, yeah, Shidoshi did say that, but Shidoshi's a guy. That's weird. And then I double checked. I look at their profile, see female. I'm like, that's weird. And then I see like formerly Shidoshi or something like that. And I was like, it just like, I had a moment where it clicked and I was like, oh no. Oops. Yikes. It wasn't anything done out of malice. It was just like it was just like a mistake. And I figured this out again during the research for the second episode. So in the second episode, I had a little disclaimer when I got to something that I was quoting from her, where I said, "Hey, just wanted to bring this up. I apologize." I think I used her dead name accidentally in the apology again, which is probably not a good idea. But I was like, "Hey, I apologize. There was no harm intended. Oopsies." It was, I don't know. It was just kind of an honest mistake. I felt really bad about that, and so when I made the DieHard DX version. That was the other big edit that I made, was in that first episode, I went and I re-recorded dialogue, and I actually went as far as to go back and, like, match up the background music so that it all blended seamlessly. So you could probably pull it up, and you might be able to, if you just, like, listen to the lines where I say the name side by side, you might be able to tell, but you could probably, if, like, you really listen to, like, where my voice... if, like, there's a little cut where my voice, is new. But, yeah, I think I actually did a pretty decent job of replacing that. I felt really bad about that. But for the most part, that was kind of, like, the main thing. It was such a crazy story. And, funny enough, in the middle of it, so I get bored very easily. And after doing the second part... I was like, I want to make a new video. Like, I want a little bit of a break from just thinking about the same thing. So that's why I made the Brad Stallion video, Soft Locks, Hard Cocks. I guess I'll talk about that after I finish talking about Die Hard, because I'll excuse me. I'll like whatever. Yeah, I want to talk about all this in one chunk. But that did, like, kind of interrupt it in the middle. Really, I just want to say that, like, when I completed the series, the comments that I got really touched me in a lot of ways. I was very surprised at some of the comments that I got from people who were really... Did I say touched already? But this was, like, very neat to read, like, some thoughts from people. There was one comment from someone who, I want to read this one little comment that really made me feel all tender, and this was very, like, I'll just read it. There's a commenter who actually comments on this channel a bit, and they go by Rimjob Ledouche. Great name. And they wrote, "This was legitimately bittersweet. I have those exact Odin Sphere and Castlevania issues of play sitting not even 10 feet away from me at this exact moment. I was bullied horrendously growing up, and the feeling of isolation I grew up with was as constant as it was suffocating. GameFan showed me early on that it was okay to love video games the way I did, that I wasn't just imagining FF6 hitting me as hard as it did as a 10-year-old in '94. I looked forward to every issue the same way a boy might be excited to see a favorite uncle. Your retrospective has given me a lot to think about in regards to the relationship between journalist and reader, specifically how Halverson flirted with authorial opacity and still managed to turn out a product as genuinely enjoyable as GameFan was. Thank you kindly. You even managed to provide a small measure of closure for me." And that was, like, a really crazy comment to read, and it was very, like, legitimizing in a lot of ways, because, I mean, when you do this, it's like people really, what I get out of making videos is that beyond just being able to express myself, there's like a two-way street to it, because I think that from a very young age, I always was able to relate. I had a very difficult time relating to other people when I was a kid, and I did not have a lot of friends when I was a young kid. I sort of started to make them in middle school, and some of those people are my best friends to this day. But as a young kid, like throughout elementary school, I was very lonely. And the way that I was able to relate to people who just like didn't really understand me or care to understand me. How did I do that little effect where I got the magnifying glass to work in part 5? It's so neat. Anyway, I totally forgot how I did that. That was such a cool effect. And my way of relating to people was always by telling stories, and it was sort of like by making them laugh. That was, I usually I like to be funny. I like to make people laugh, but it was really by being able to relate things that were happening in my life in like an entertaining, interesting way, and then eventually it became things that not just my life, but things that I was interested in, and that's kind of like a real hallmark of a lot of like my creative pursuits, is that I do these things because it kind of, I feel like it helps people understand me a little bit better, and it kind of I don't know, it sort of reaches out a little bit. So yeah, there's something satisfying about being able to express yourself, but there's also something equally or maybe more satisfying about being able to make yourself understood, which is maybe more important, and it's kind of like the cornerstone of communication, isn't it? And that's stories are a form of communication, and I think like if at least someone is able to get something out of something that I made, that to me it's almost like over 100%, right? Because if I'm able to communicate what I feel about something, and someone's able to at least get pretty much all of that, but then they're also able to infer something of their own that is not necessarily coming from me, but comes from the thing that I like. Fucking this experience from this comment, like this person's experience with Game Fan and Play Magazine growing up, throughout their life, I can't relate to that in that specific way. Like, I didn't grow up with Game Fan. I found out about it in, like a year ago. I was just talking about why I thought it was interesting. And for that person, I feel like maybe in some way, hey, maybe they're listening, they were at least able to like create more out of the stuff that even I was that I was able to offer, that it sort of became like, I don't know if more than the sum of its parts was really correct, but yeah, that's, I feel like I'm getting, like, if you understand, if I'm able to properly explain something, I feel like, and you're able to understand that, that's like let's say 100%. But if you're able to take that and you get something greater out of it than was even coming from me, then in my mind that's like over 100%, if that makes sense. And it's like, that's one of the things that's really neat about art, is that it's like, oh boy, the lights are flickering. Hopefully the power doesn't go out. We've been having insane freaking storms on the West Coast last last week or so. It's what's cool about art is that it's like, it can have that effect where it's like free energy. It's like creating more than what was there initially. Yeah, like that's, oh god, the fucking lights. It's really interesting. God, I hope the fucking power doesn't go out. So yeah, that kind of a comment was very validating for what I do, because sometimes I have some insecurities about like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, what am I is this going anywhere? I kind of, I have to like kind of perk myself up and remember like, no, okay, I just got to keep going, and something's going to work out, and I think I have something valuable with what I do, and that's the kind of comment that really hits me in a special place like that very much makes me feel like what I'm doing is the right thing to be doing. Like, I could be making more money working like a minimum wage job or something, but the experience of being able to like have this kind of an effect on someone, even if it is very rare, it makes me feel like this is like a more substantial thing to be doing with my life, which is weird because I usually feel like art is very not doesn't contribute to society. I just got done with talking about how it does, but what the fuck.